Hopefully this works. All right, so we're going to list them from smallest to most specific, and it starts with an organism, which is a single species. Then it goes to a population, then a community, then an ecosystem, then a biome, and then a biosphere. If you need help to remember that, you could come up with another saying. I don't know one off the top of my head, but if you could come up with something to help you remember this for the test, I encourage you to do so. So we're going to match the description with the appropriate level of ecology. If you're just a single ant, just one ant all by itself, we say that's an organism. A colony of ants, we say that's a population. And that's because it's the same species. The ants, grass, and flowers, these are all biotic, which means they're all living. So we say that's the community. The ants, grass, flowers, and sun, that's everything that's biotic and abiotic. So we call that an ecosystem. You ready to go on to the next page? A group of biotic and abiotic factors that share a similar climate, that's the key word here, and weather patterns, that's what we call a biome. And this portion of Earth that supports all life, we call that a biosphere. So we're listing the levels of organization, and I know on the website it looks better than my printed piece of paper. I'm sorry about that. But at the very top, that's an atom. As we're going down, atoms turn into molecules. And going from molecules inside of a cell, the big thing is a cell. Inside of the cell, we have organelles. That's your nucleus, that's your mitochondria, that's your ER, your ribosomes. And we'll talk more about those later. Your cells help make up your tissue. Your tissues help make up an organ. All of your organs together make up an organ system. And then your organ systems all together make up an organism. That's just one single organism in a species, but all of the species together, that's called a population. And then I'm going to go back. From a population, we have a community. Which is everything that's living, all biotic. Then we have an ecosystem. Again, that's everything that's biotic and abiotic. And then finally, we have a biosphere. All right, let's keep going. The main difference between a community and an ecosystem is that a community only includes biotic factors. So a community is only things that are living. And an ecosystem is going to include biotic and abiotic. So everything that's alive and not alive is included in an ecosystem. So we're going to use these images below to see what's the difference between a primary succession and a secondary succession. And I don't know what your website looks like, but mine's just printed them all out in one sheet. So I'll just write P for primary, S for secondary. So pioneer species like lichens and mosses, that's my primary. Those are the first two organisms that start to appear on bare rock. The longer form of succession is also primary. It takes a longer time because we're starting with rock. We don't have any soil, so it's going to take us a longer time to grow trees. Caused by deforestation, this is going to be secondary succession. This is when we take out trees, but there's still soil, so we can still grow from that. When the soil is present, again, that's secondary. Pioneer species are mostly likely grasses and small plants. That's secondary because grasses and small plants can grow in soil, and soil is only present in secondary. A greater biodiversity to start, that's secondary because there's more different plant species to start off with. Caused by volcanoes. Volcanoes are going to turn everything to rock to start all over, so that's primary. Lava's going to melt down everything. There's no soil left. Caused by forest fires, tornadoes, and hurricanes. Those are all going to leave behind the soil, so that's secondary. A quicker form of succession, that's secondary. We don't need to turn rock into soil. There's already soil there, so it happens a lot faster. Created by retreating glaciers. This is primary because there's no soil there where the glaciers were. A lower biodiversity to start, that's primary because there's less organisms there. No soil present, again, that's primary. We're starting on bare rock. And then starts with bare rock, like I said, that's primary. There's no soil present. All right, from what kingdom is the organism that plays a major role in the nitrogen cycle, performing nitrogen fixation and denitrification? So in the PowerPoint on the slides, I said that it was bacteria. Bacteria is the one that's going to help us turn nitrogen into forms that we can actually use. As part of the nitrogen cycle, animals acquire or take in nitrogen by doing which of the following? So animals, humans are animals. We take in nitrogen by breathing in the air. And that's how we take in our nitrogen because 78% of the atmosphere is nitrogen. Use the image of the carbon cycle to help you sort the processes that absorb and release carbon to and from the atmosphere. So I'm going to put R for released, A for absorbed. Erupting volcano. This is going to release carbon into the atmosphere. Photosynthesis by producers. This is going to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. Oh, just kidding. Yeah, no, that one's right. Burning fossil fuels is going to release carbon into the air. Dissolving in the ocean, that's going to absorb carbon. Decomposition of dead material into soil or sediment rocks, that's going to help absorb carbon. Respiration by plants and animals, we breathe out carbon. Burning of forests, that's going to release carbon. And that's it. Okay, so this is the part. I heard some of you couldn't see all of these. I'm really sorry about this. Um, so I'm just gonna write in the answers. This one is a symbiotic, both benefit. So I'm gonna put positive and positive. Parasitism is when one benefits and the other is harmed. Commensalism is when one benefits and the other is neither helped nor harmed. An example can be birds on buffalo and insects, birds on the buffalo that eat insects. Parasitism can be a wasp injecting its eggs into another organism. And then commensalism could be a small fish swimming under a bigger fish for protection. And I'm not sure what your symbols look like on the computer, so I'm sorry about that. All right, now we're going to use the word bank to complete the sentences below. A producer is an organism at the beginning of the food chain because they can produce their own food using energy from the sun. Organisms that feed off other organisms and cannot make their own are known as heterotrophs. A non-living part of the environment is a abiotic factor, and the living part is a biotic factor. A consumer that eats only plants is known as a herbivore. A consumer that eats both plants and animals is called an omnivore. Energy is transferred through an ecosystem by eating or consuming food and is represented on the food chain and food webs using arrows. And decomposers break down decaying organisms and nutrients are put back into the soil by bacteria and fungi. So now we're going to use the following food web to answer the questions. The arrow represents energy. In this food chain, which organism is the producer? The grass. Which organism is the primary consumer? The grasshopper. Which organism is a tertiary consumer? The snake. Which organism is an herbivore that eats the grass? That's the grasshopper. What type of consumers are the frogs and the snake? They are carnivores because they eat other organisms. If the frog population increased, what would happen to the grasshopper population? Since the frogs eat the grasshoppers, they would start to decrease. If the frog population increased, what would happen to the snake population? Since the snakes eat the frogs, they would increase because there's more frogs to eat. Which organism has the highest amount of energy? It always starts at the bottom of the food chain, so it's the grass. Which organism has the lowest amount of energy? That's the animal at the top of the food chain, so that's the snake. And what was the original source of energy in this food web? The sun. Every food chain, food web gets its energy from the sun. Now we're going to use this food web to answer the questions. What level of consumer is a wildcat? The wildcat can be two different ones. It can be secondary and tertiary. What level of consumer is the goat? The goat's going to eat the grass, so that's primary. Which organism can be both a primary and a secondary consumer? That's the rabbit. What kingdoms are missing from the food web that play a critical role in breaking down matter so nutrients can be recycled? The bacteria and the fungi, those are our decomposers. And every food web and food chain does have decomposers. This food chain can be found in the coastal waters of Virginia, the population of which organisms in the food chain would be the first to decline if commercial fishing overharvested shrimp. If we started to overharvest shrimp, the first one to decline would be this fish. All right, the tertiary food web. Now you're going to you're going to tag the organisms as a producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumer. So hopefully you labeled these correctly. We only have one producer. That's the plant. Animals that eat the plant are primary consumers. Primary consumer, primary consumer, primary consumer. We only had 3. Secondary consumers eat the primary consumers. So secondary consumer, secondary consumer, secondary consumer. The rabbit can also be a secondary consumer. Secondary consumer. And that's 6 total. The tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers. Tertiary consumer, tertiary consumer. The wildcat can also be a tertiary consumer, and the jacktail can also be a tertiary consumer. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 tertiary consumers. And a quaternary consumer, that's going to be the lion. And we only have 1 of those. All right, so now we're going to use our food web, and we're going to fill in the trophic levels on the pyramid. So decomposers are going to feed off everything in a food web. You have your producers at the bottom. Then you have your primary consumers who eat the producers. Then you have your secondary. Then you have your tertiary. Now we need to fill in the type of energy. At the very bottom, we're going to start off with our producers with 10,000 joules. Remember, as you go up, you only keep 10%. The other 90% is lost through heat. And as you go up, you're just going to take off a 0. So we start with 10,000, then we go to 1,000, then we go to 100, then we go to 10. And that's the rule of 10 for energy. And then make sure you review HIPCO, understand what it stands for, understand how us humans affect the environment. And that's pretty much it. That's all you need to study for your test tomorrow. Make sure you do your FRQ